Today we're going to talk about the power of divine love to not only comfort and make people feel like they're worthy and they belong, but to actually bring whole person health, rejuvenation, joy into people's lives in a way that I don't think any pill or physical manipulation ever could. The Bible uses these very powerful words like salvation and deliverance. Although we're going to be talking about prayer and how prayer brings health into your life today, the kind of health that I'm going to be talking about is not just a, well, yeah, my body doesn't have anything wrong with it kind of health. It's the kind of health that reveals our purpose for living, that shows us beauty and possibility and wonder and intelligence all around us. It's the kind of health that makes life wonderful, that makes life so worth living and it, just a real joy. And some people, when they hear religious talks like this is a talk on Christian Science, they think, well, I might not be that into religion. And especially hearing words like Christian Science, they'll say, well, I'm into science, perhaps. I'm into truth and real knowledge that we can prove, but that's not religion. How could religion be a science? How could Christianity be a science? And some people think, well, how can you call something a science like a small religion? Not everybody's Christian. How can it be science? Because science applies to everybody. Well, the word Christian comes from the word Christ, and Christ means the Messiah, the Savior, that which really delivers us, that brings us salvation from all the difficulties in life. And Jesus was someone who brought salvation to people, whole person, whole experience health here and now. Heaven on earth, you could call it. Jesus never said you get heaven with death. He said it's right here, it's at hand, it's within us. And he showed people how to discover it and experience it here and now. I love to think about Jesus and how he reached out to anyone who seemed to be outside the sphere of love. The Bible says God is love. And I think Jesus understood more than anyone who ever lived that divine love is really with everyone. It's really the defining factor in everyone's life. We're actually made of divine love of God. And so wherever the culture in which Jesus lived said, oh, okay, it's good to love here, but not there. Wherever the medical field said it's good to love here, but not over there. Or wherever his own religion said it's good to love here, but not over there. What did Jesus do? Right where his religion was saying it's good to love, but not the prostitutes. Jesus went to them. He went to those dark places and he brought the light of love, and he brought healing. He brought restoration. He brought renewed vision in life. Right where the culture of his day was saying it's good to love, but especially not people like those tax collectors who are ripping us off. Jesus loved those people, those outcasts. And right where the medical field was saying, don't touch those lepers. It's physical contact that is the cause of disease. Jesus went there and he brought with him real health. He understood health was really something that comes from an understanding of God. It's actually a mental quality. Health is something wholly mental. We're going to talk about that today. And when we have it, we can begin to see life differently and experience right functioning bodies, not only for our own body, our own self, but for others as well. Right functioning lives. Well, so we're going to really dive into this today. This is really a how-to kind of lecture. How can we pray in such a way that brings healing? When I was in college, I came across a wonderful book. I was studying religion. I was asking all those big questions about why we're here and how we can do the most good. And I came across this book called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, written by a remarkable lady named Mary Baker Eddy. And when I read this book, it felt like a coming home. It felt like things that I had known deep down inside, but I had never heard articulated so sublimely, wonderfully, numinously. And as I read that book, wonderful things started to happen to me. I was doing personal care work for a woman who was chronically ill, and I started to share what I was learning in that book. And within a few months, she was up out of her bed, taking dance classes, art classes, whole new life. My dad, who had been an alcoholic for as long as I can remember or could remember, I started to see him differently, and all of a sudden we stopped arguing, and he lost his appetite for alcohol, even though he had tried everything up to that point. And from that point on, he took a 180 and no longer argued with me about religion, but started to want to learn more and became my biggest champion in terms of supporting my spiritual work. And as I was reading this book, Science and Health, it really is a key to the scriptures, and it brought renewed interest in the Bible. And I always loved the Bible. I grew up reading the Bible, but I always felt like the lessons in it were a bit far off. Like it was something that maybe if I live a good life when I die, then I could reap the rewards of living a good and ethical life and so forth. And I liked the morality in it, the goodness I felt when people talked about Jesus and biblical truth, but it just felt a bit far off. And I didn't always feel in the loop. I had a friend who had the same name as me, still has the same name. His name was Nate, and he lived a couple of doors down from me growing up, and his dad was a Baptist minister, and they were a very religious family, and I felt like he kind of got this religiosity from osmosis or something, or it was his birthright. And that family had all sorts of wonderful miracles always happening. When times got tough, they would pray, wonderful things would happen. But my family wasn't very religious, and I just thought, well, I don't have that, right? You know, I wasn't born into it like that. And as I started to read this book, Science and Health, I started to talk about Christianity as a science. And something that is scientific, it means that it applies to everyone. It's universal. It can be demonstrated. It's based upon universal laws. And so the Christ, that transforming power of love that came right from God, that message of love that Jesus fully embodied and lived and allowed, and that which really animated him, that Christ was and is here for me right now. It's here for you. That Christ, that saving element of divine love, it's understandable. We can actually utilize it. It's interesting. Before I joined this call, I was out and doing some yard work this morning, and the sun was just shining on my face, and it felt so beautiful. It felt so refreshing, and I just stopped at one point as I was raking the leaves, and I just felt that sun on my face, and it was so lovely. And it got me thinking, because this morning I was up so early, I saw the sunrise. It was so beautiful. I loved watching all those colors. And then in that afternoon, I was, getting that sun on my face, and I loved that. And the sun is a wonderful metaphor for God, because the sun really is that which is allowing us to live. If the sun stopped shining right now, we wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't have the energy to grow and so forth, and it would get just way too cold, and we wouldn't feel that warmth. And not only that, but when we don't even see the sun, when it's even dark out at night and it seems like the sun isn't shining, the sun is always shining, and it's still sustaining us. And all the beautiful colors that we see in life, it's all because the sun is lighting things up. And not only that, but we're learning to utilize the sun in more interesting ways. I recently bought my dream car. I recently bought an electric car, and this car can be powered by solar power. It can be powered right by the sun, right? You can put solar panels on a roof and it can power that car, and it can go down the road faster than a cheetah. And it's really amazing, because sometimes when people think about God, they think, well, maybe God created us, but now we're kind of on our own, right? God is not that which is making and sustaining us in this moment, and I'm not sure how I could utilize God in a way that can produce wonderful things that seem impossible. If someone from a couple hundred years ago saw an electric car flying down the road, they would say, oh my gosh, that's magic or something. They would have no idea how that is possible. But people had to understand some laws of the universe, how to utilize that power from the sun and turn it into electricity, and to allows that car to go down the road. And it's really amazing. What we're going to see today in prayer is that not only is God the one source of our life, that which really warms our heart and lives, and is always shining even when times seem dark, and but it's something we can learn to utilize. There are actually laws about how to utilize the love of God to bring about health and prosperity and goodness and joy and purpose in our lives. And it might seem like a miracle to some. Like a lot of times when people thought throughout the ages, when someone prays and all of a sudden someone gets better or something wonderful happens, they would call it a miracle. They thought it was a breaking of natural law. But I actually think that harmony is what is the most, it is natural. Harmony is what's underlying existence. This book, Science and Health, it says perfection underlies reality. Without perfection, nothing is wholly real. Now, what I want to share with you today is based upon the very first line in this book. The first line in this book, it identifies the kind of prayer that reforms sin, which means off the mark thinking, really aligns us with the thoughts of God, and brings out true health. And Mary Baker Eddy, the author of this book, Science and Health, captures the prayer that reforms the sinner and heals the sick as an absolute faith that all things are possible to God, a spiritual understanding of Him, and unselfed love. I just love this line because I found it to be so true in my life in so many ways. There's so many things to say about it. But often when people think about religion, they think that it's, you have to have a kind of blind faith, leap outside of reason if you want to believe in God. But I actually think God is the most reasonable thing in the world. Just think about it. Often we go around our days and thinking that we're self-made, that we have to make something of our lives. And yet there actually is, if we step back, we're all in a life together. And we could say we're in one life together. And that life is actually creating and sustaining this moment. And we're of life. We're made by life. And I think life is God. That's what I'm talking about. The one life that we all belong to. You think about those moments you've really felt close to life. You've really felt at one with it. What's that feel like when you feel at one with life, when you truly belong to it? Like when you're walking out in nature and all of a sudden it feels like the trees and the sky and the animals, you're not separate from them. You belong. You have this deep moment of belonging, perhaps. That's love. It's like when you look into someone's eyes and you feel like all of a sudden that two-ness collapses and there's just one. That feeling is love, that oneness, that unity of being. And the Bible says God is love. Life is love. Those are just different words for God. And when you step back and you think about, well, my thoughts, right? I do create my life because I have my thoughts and I choose my thoughts and all that. Well, if you just listen for a moment, you actually don't create thoughts. Thoughts just show up. And they're either good, true, sustaining, real thoughts from God that bring harmony, or they're kind of malicious or off the mark ideas from the world. They're kind of like reflections of world thought gone astray. They're fearful thoughts. Well, speaking of fearful thoughts, I know a lot of people have been afraid the last year or two. We've been going through a very difficult time with a worldwide pandemic. And there's been just a culture of fear out there. And there's this, you just turn on the news and there's just all this bad stuff, right? And it's hard to deal with it and hard to feel happy and at one with God's love. I had an experience recently. I was in my apartment building in Boston, and there was a family. There's this family a few doors down from me. Really doesn't like to wear masks, and masks are required in our apartment building. They still are at the moment. And it was fine with me. These folks weren't wearing masks, but that was just they just didn't want to abide by the law. And most everybody in the apartment building, even though they don't want to, they understand this was the law of the city at the time, and they just do it. And at one point, I was outside in the courtyard, and I was kind of having a tough day. I wasn't really feeling my best, and I was feeling a little frustrated about certain things in my life, and I was with my little daughter. She's just 4, and these folks who live a couple doors down from me came outside, and it was the mom and her son. She has 2 little boys, but just an older boy was with her. And this boy was around the same age as my daughter, and they started just to get so excited to see each other, and they were rolling around and having so much fun. And then all of a sudden, the mom came up to me, and she just said, "Oh my gosh, it's been the worst day. My boy is so sick." And she said, "Not only him, but my husband, he's so sick." And she started listing out all these symptoms. And then I looked over at the little boy, and he did look really bad. And at first I thought, gosh, why are you allowing her or him to roll around with my little daughter? And I felt this fear all of a sudden. It was like all the stuff you hear on the news about people catching disease because of physical contact, and I just started to feel this feeling of fear. Now, as you'll hear in this lecture, everything about my life is just the opposite of this. It's about overcoming fear and about how understanding true mentality that comes from God immunizes us from any difficulty and is the source of real health. And we don't need to worry about physical contact with people when we really understand this. But at the same time, we can be safe and practical and abide by law. Well, anyhow, I started to feel that sense of fear, and I kind of brushed it off. And later that night, all of a sudden, I started to feel those symptoms that woman had been describing to me. And again, I kind of brushed it off. I half-heartedly prayed. And that next morning, all of a sudden, I woke up, and I was just really ill with all those symptoms she talked about. And I really buckled down and prayed at that point. And I want to share with you how I prayed, because I had a wonderful healing, and it really taught me a lesson that I tend to learn again and again and again. And the Bible, there's a theme in the Bible about having one God, really having this absolute faith in one source, that there really is one thing behind everything, and that one thing is love. It's divine love. And it's the one source. And there's a focus in the Bible about not having other idols. What does that mean? Not believing that other things are really the source of what is creating our experience and what is creating us. And I started to go down in my thought as I was praying that morning about all the different beliefs I had about what was influencing me. There were kind of idols in my thought. There were little gods in my thought. Well, that first little god was fear. That I thought, well, I have all this fear, and this fear is kind of producing the negative effect. And I thought, well, what is fear? Fear is an emotion. It's an emotion coming from a vision of the world that is wrong. When you see something that is really wrong, like sickness or misbehavior, we could describe that as wrong. And when you talk about something being wrong, like 2 + 2 = 5, you would say that's wrong. Why is it wrong? Because it doesn't have a principle behind it. And it doesn't produce good results. If you're learning mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4 is true, because when you apply it, it produces harmony. Like if you're building a house and using that perfect measurement, 2 + 2 = 4, you're going to produce a strong, stable, harmonious structure that won't fall down. But if you're using 2 + 2 = 5, it's wrong. It doesn't have a principle behind it. It doesn't have this perfect, invisible principle behind it that produces harmony and good results. Well, this book, Science and Health, describes God as the principle of existence. That principle is love. And the Bible says perfect love casts out fear. So I start to recognize that love was the one power. I couldn't keep that idol of fear in my thought. I couldn't think of it as a creative power in my life. I let that go. And I started to think about that woman. I started to think about the mom there. And I wasn't seeing her as the image and likeness of God. The Bible says that each and every one of us are the image and likeness of God, not a mortal who could make good or bad decisions. I started to really value her, that she had beautiful and has beautiful motherly qualities. I started to really value them as something coming, reflecting from God. And I started to feel a sense of her just total goodness, and that just all the sense of her being incomplete or inconsiderate or anything like that just dropped away. And I started to think about that little boy. And I started to think, oh, all the qualities of innocence and joy that he had. And it was so easy to see that he couldn't be a vessel for evil. No, he was the image and likeness of God. And that was just so wonderful to see. And as I went down all this different idols I felt that were in my thought, the biggest one at the end of that line was I started to think my own false thinking. I just thought, well, if I had been prayed up, I wouldn't have got this sickness. Oh, I can't believe I was holding to those bad thoughts and not being on my game spiritually. And I started to think my own faulty thinking was the cause of me getting those symptoms and being so ill. And I started to recognize that I am not a creator. My thoughts don't create reality. There's one creator, and it's love. And when I got really clear on that and I put all those four idols out of thought, resolved them all of a sudden I instantly felt well. There was no recovery process. It wasn't like things slowly got better over time, just instantly free. And, if you only experience this once in your life, this kind of experience, it might kind of jar thought, like, wow, maybe life is a little different than I thought it was. But when you genuinely practice Christian Science, you can see again and again and again and again kinds of experiences like this that can't be explained away by any psychosomatic or stress relief paradigm. It's not just like, well, I had some good thoughts and my mind was stress-free and the body responded. There's something much, much more going on here. One of the big insights in this book is that life is not material like it appears to be. For something to be material is that it's really described or captured in a body of limitations. So, we're in the 21st century now, and sometimes people say, oh, can we upload consciousness to a computer? Are we going to live virtual lives or something at some point? And they think that our lives can be described by a series of limited numbers or calculations. Like if you, cataloged all the different limitations in my life, like tried to describe me in limited terms, this tall, this color, eyes, and I could run this fast, and this is the way I talk, and take all these little measurements and then try to capture all those measurements. What those measurements would lack is everything that constitutes my real life. It would lack mind, it would lack love, it would lack soul or spirit. It would really lack a principle behind it. And everything that Christian Science reveals as God that constitutes our real life can't be described by any set of limitations. It can't be described by matter. And what's so wonderful is that Christian Science, it is the universal understanding, the science of infinity, of God, the infinite, the eternal. For something to be eternal, it means that it just is. It wasn't created by something else. So often when people talk about a material theory of life, they often think of evolution, like things evolve to be what they are. But if you think about something that just is, like numbers, for example, 4 plus 4 equals 8, that didn't evolve over time to be what it is. It wasn't different 2,000 years ago, right? It's the exact same today as it was 2,000 years ago. It doesn't matter what color skin or where you live in the world. This fact is just true. It just is. It's eternal. It's not altered or created by time and space. It's not subject to the theory of evolution. It was never born and it will never die. It just is. And so you can see how that word eternal all of a sudden is becoming clear. Like, okay, yeah, well, I can see it in mathematics, but it's true about each and every one of us. We are sons and daughters of the eternal. We are expressions of the eternal, expressions of love, of life, of God. And God is not something that is created by something else. It just is. Now, it's so interesting if you read the Bible. The very first chapter in the Bible is Genesis 1, and it's about oneness. It's about the one thing that's going on, God. The word for God in that chapter is spirit. And it's interesting. It's basically this beautiful poem that talks about there's one thing, God, spirit, or love. It creates everything in its own image, and everything is good. And there's this beautiful sense of continuity and growth. And yet there's no introduction of anything that's wrong, any sin, any sickness, any death, any discord. There's nothing wrong in that Genesis 1. And it says, God made all that was made, and behold, it was very good. End of story. But that's not the end of the Bible. The second chapter is a kind of a picture of duality, of two-ness, which the world so often appears to us today. And in this chapter 2 of Genesis, all of a sudden there's a capricious God. There's a God that is both good and bad. And it makes man as both good and bad as well. And that first man is called Adam. And what does Adam do? He falls asleep right away. He falls into a slumber, and he starts to dream that woman was created for him. He must have been dreaming. And then his progeny start to believe in this vision of the world as fundamentally good and bad and made up of matter and not of spirit, made up of something the very opposite of spirit, but limited matter. And so if life is in matter, like we can call matter money or stuff or land or possessions, things, right? Material things, then you have to fight for it to get it, right? And because there's a limited amount of it. And then all hell breaks loose in this unnatural competitive environment, right? And I think the whole story of the Bible is about getting out of that sense of duality back to oneness, outside of duality back to oneness. A member of this church, sponsoring church in Rochester, talked about duality as something she really wanted to pray about. And duality is, we just see it everywhere. You turn on the news, there's two sides just fighting. It seems like male and females, the two sexes are often fighting. It seems like, there's just these opposite tribes in the world, whether it's white and black people or somebody, certain people from a certain country versus another big country. Whatever it is, there's this sense of tribalism, of two teams fighting against each other that we often see again and again and again, no matter where we look in life. And it's interesting because we're so attracted to this. If you think about what we do for fun, we often watch movies, and and movies for entertainment, we watch these very discordant movies. Have you ever watched a movie that was just about peace and harmony and oneness the whole time? No. And why not? Why aren't we attracted to that oneness? Why are we attracted to that discord? It's a very good question to ask. We have to grow spiritually to become more and more attracted to just oneness and not duality, not fighting, not conflict. Well, I want to share with you a wonderful healing that I witnessed in Christian Science that really taught me how to step outside of duality and really understand something about the oneness of God. And this had to do with that sentence I talked about, having absolute faith that includes spiritual understanding and unselfed love. So I want to take you halfway around the world out to the Himalayas. I really fell in love with the Himalayas after I graduated college. I took a big around the world trip, and when I was on this trip, I just got up to those high peaks, and I just fell in love with that grand view from up there. And I had lots of problems with altitude sickness. I'm going to later share a healing with you of how I finally overcame this problem. But it's common that people have altitude sickness when they get up to the, above 1,500, 1,600, or 16,000 feet. I had it really bad, not in a normal way. I would just get so ill. And I had these two books with me. I had the Bible and Science and Health. And something in the Bible is very interesting. Jesus essentially says, I'm not going to be with you forever, but don't worry. I will send you a comforter. And when Mary Baker Eddy, the author of this book, uncovered the science, the universal logic, the know-how behind the healings of Jesus, behind the mentality of Jesus, she really felt that she had fulfilled that prophetic vision of Jesus. Jesus knew something was going to come that would help people understand his teachings and that really bring them that deep comfort of God. And when I was reading these two books, which actually in a Christian Science church, you consider these two books your pastor. When I was reading these two books when I was up in those mountains, I felt like this pastor was just speaking to me words of comfort and peace and real health. And every time I was up in those high mountains when I dealt with altitude sickness, I prayed and I had some wonderful healing. And as I was praying, I didn't have a complete healing of this extreme altitude sickness until many months later. Sometimes people ask me when I give a talk like this, well, what do you do when you're not fully healed? How do I pray about that, or what do I do? And maybe I'm not comfortable praying for others because I haven't had my healing yet. And I hadn't had my healing about this altitude sickness, but as I was praying, I couldn't help but see people around me in a new light. And I experienced really wonderful healings as I was praying for myself, even before that final healing came. Now, I want to share with you one of those healings. I came across a little village on the Nepali-Indian border, and there was a man in one of these villages who was just aggressively negative. And I really wanted to share with him God's love, and I wanted to see what was going on to cause all that mental turmoil. He just seemed like he wasn't of right mind, like he had some kind of psychosis, and the rest of his family were the most lovely people in the world. So I really wanted to figure out what was going on with him and help him, but I never was able to. And a few days passed, and I was back down in the base camp area of Darjeeling in India, and a mountaineering guide gave me a call, and he said, "Hey Nate, that guy you met up in the mountains who was so negative, he unfortunately got into an accident, and he's really ill, and I'm going to visit him in the hospital. Would you like to come?" And I went and talked to him. And when I got to the hospital, I was not prepared for what I was about to see. I had only seen and heard things like this at Halloween here in America. There were people just in such horrible conditions. And this was especially true when I got to this man's room. He was acting as if he was possessed by a demon. And he was playing the part quite well. And what was so strange for me is that everyone in that room, the doctor, his family, all thought this was normal. And they talked about it like this was something they had seen in their culture time and time again. And the pattern they had witnessed would be someone would get usually into some kind of accident, and they would become possessed. And they would stay in this terrible state for a few days and then pass on. And this man had a little injury from a fall on the mountain, but it was this possession of his thought that was really the problem. Now, I had seen something similar when I was in high school. There was a professional hypnotist who came to our school, and he hypnotized people with very subtle thoughts. You could barely even tell he was doing it. And then all of a sudden, before my eyes, friends of mine were acting like they were lions or tigers or goblins or all sorts of things. And it really just shocked me when I saw it. And I saw another hypnotist show when I was in college, and I was sitting next to somebody who just started to act so strange to me. Right next to me, started to become hypnotized out in the audience, and right next to me, way in the back of the audience. And that was really, really interesting because it was just thought, very subtle thoughts that were changing somebody's mentality and losing their sense of identity and acting out a whole different sense of who they were. And when I was in that hospital, I could tell that this man was acting like a demon. That wasn't his true personality. That wasn't his true being. He he's the image and likeness of God. That's his true being. And so often Jesus, he would say things like, "I am not of this world." And I think what he meant by that is he wasn't defining himself, thinking about himself from world beliefs, from the cultural beliefs that were surrounding him about limitation and material identity and life being based upon just what has been seen previously. Material science is usually the patterns of past experience. We study what we've seen and heard and then predict what might happen in the future, or predict how we can harness those patterns in technology, for example. And now, science 2,000 years ago was not nearly as advanced as it is today, but people were still observing patterns. Jesus saw patterns of sickness and how sometimes they resulted in bad outcomes, and he saw patterns of weather that resulted in bad outcomes. And he never said, well, we just have to accept that bad things happen because of these patterns we've seen in the past. No, no, no. He only saw God, divine love, as the source of everything that's right. And things that are destructive are, by definition, wrong. Something that is eternal can't be destroyed. And everything that is real about life is eternal. It can't be destroyed. It's not subject to destruction or decay or dissolution or conflict even. Now, if there's just one power to life, there can't be any conflict or friction. The world today, it seems to be plagued with depression or false mental attitudes, as if we're being confined or pressed down, maybe just made to feel little or not ourselves. And the word depression, one way to look at it, that prefix D means of, and pression means pressure. So if we're defining ourselves by pressure, it's a definition of two-ness, because for pressure or friction to happen, there has to be two powers, two forces pushing up against each other. But if there's only one power, there's no conflict there. There's no pressure. And when we really understand the oneness of God, that we only express one thing, that word expression, their prefix X means without, pressure. So to be an expression of God is to be without pressure, without conflict. And as I was praying for that man that night, I made a pact in my own heart. I was going to go back to my room and pray until that fear dissipated, until I could fully recognize this man as the image and likeness of God. And I didn't want to have a blind faith. I really wanted to have an absolute faith in this, but I could base it on spiritual understanding. And I could base it upon that love that is not selfish. It's the love of God. And as I was praying for that man, I don't remember everything I prayed that night, but I got the feeling that he was an essential, eternal element of God that could not be manipulated in any way, couldn't be changed. His pure spiritual identity was right there present. Think about it. If you think about another analogy with numbers here, imagine if you pick a random number, 1,632,000. Sounds kind of random. You think, well, what does that number matter? I've never thought about that number. I've never written it down. It's probably dispensable. It's like, what matters if that number dies? Well, that number, it's not material. Like, you could write that number on a piece of paper and erase it. Nothing would happen. Nothing would change. And as a material representation, it's not really needed because it's an idea. That number is an idea. It's an idea that can be infinitely represented, but it's an idea that's absolutely vital to reality. And if you plucked that number out of reality as an idea, no one could think it, nobody could represent it, nobody could see it, nobody could use it, then this live stream would stop working, I guarantee you. Every banking system in the world would collapse, our economy would collapse. It would hell would break loose, way worse than any virus could cause. just because that number as an idea went missing. It died, it passed on. Well, that number, it can't die. It's eternal. It's ever present. Always has been, always will be. And that number, it's absolutely vital to the principle of mathematics. Well, I think each and every one of us, absolutely vital to the principle of life, God. And that man, he was and is absolutely needed as an idea of God, as an expression of God. And as I was holding to ideas like that, they made me feel so good inside. They made me feel right because they are right. When you love, the reason why you feel so good when you love, the reason why it feels right because it is literally right. Like 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's correct. You're doing what you're designed to do. If you hate somebody or you go around being filled with fear and limitation and thinking life is material, the reason why you're going to feel wrong is because that is literally wrong. There's no principle behind that. It's not true. and it's going to cause bad results. You know, if you haven't read your Bible in a while, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, is a wonderful place to start. Most scholars think that's a collection of teachings, and I usually think of it as Jesus' greatest hits. And at the end of it, Jesus essentially says, if you build your life on my teachings, it's like building on the rock. And when the storms of life come, when the difficulties come crashing down on you, don't worry, because your life, it's built on the rock, on what's true. It's, your consciousness, your existence, not going to be knocked over, because you've built it on something solid and something eternal, not the sands of material belief. Well, as I was praying for that man, I felt such a wonderful sense of joy of a good foundation under me. I was praying about something right out from God in a way that was deeply logical, made me feel deeply right. Now, I've been talking about different words for God here. Christian Science, it really is so much about the understanding of God. If you take a 2-week class, if you get really interested in Christian Science and want to dive deeper, you can take a 2-week class to learn more. And for the first day, you usually just explore what is God. And in Science and Health, it says God is incorporeal, meaning not in a body or form, but divine, supreme, infinite mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, love. And Mary Baker Eddy also writes in Science and Health that it is our ignorance of God, the divine principle, which produces apparent discord, and the right understanding of Him restores harmony. You could even say the right understanding of the One, the eternal One, the one thing that's going on, love, restores harmony. The right understanding of life restores harmony. All these different words for God, they're describing the same thing from a different angle. God is life. Life is love. What is love? It's truth. When Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free or make you free, He was talking about love. He was talking about God. What is love? What is God? What is truth? It's spirit. It's something that is not material. It's not finite. If you talk about the spirit of something, it's not contained to any form or time or space. Soul is another word for it. The source of all beauty and creativity. God is the creator, so we're all creative. We're all soulful. Mind, one intelligent, infinite mind. That's God. And so I was reaching out to wonderful ideas from God as I was in prayer there, and it was just filling me up with that sense of perfection. It was delivering me. It was saving me from those feelings of fear and limitation that I had in the hospital. And I just knew that man was safe in God's care and was going to be okay. I just knew it. And then I went back to his village a couple of days later. I was hiking past his village. He was already back there when I was walking by. And not only was he back there, but he had this wonderful, winsome smile on his face. He looked like he was on cloud 9, totally different demeanor. That same joy that I felt that night praying, it seemed like it was right there with him. And Christian Science prayer doesn't just patch up situations. it really heals from the inside and out. It really gets to the root of issues and brings out whole person well-being. Well, as I said, I eventually had this healing of altitude sickness. After that experience happened, that was wonderful, wonderful. And I continue to have wonderful experiences hiking and always praying. Prayer, I should say, parenthetically, is something we can do all the time. The Bible says we should pray without ceasing. It's not, there's no off button to prayer. Prayer is really an attitude. It's a way of looking at life. We want to look at life from a prayerful point of view all the time. We want to look at life from God's point of view, so to speak. Normally we see life as material, like everything is born and it dies. But that's an earthly, limited perspective. Like this morning when I saw the sunrise, it was beautiful, and I'm telling you, it was a sunrise. That's how we talk about it. But it wasn't really a sunrise. The sun doesn't rise. Before people knew anything about astronomy, I think there were some people in the world who thought, well, the sun is being born every day. Maybe it's a different sun every day. And it comes up and it's shining the brightest in the middle of the day, and then it kind of decays and it drops underneath the horizon, and it kind of dies, right? It's not there anymore. And then, next day there's another sun, or maybe the sun is reborn. Well, now we know that actually, from a higher, more heavenly viewpoint, if we lifted ourselves up outside of the Earth's atmosphere altogether, we would see that the Earth is rotating around the sun, but the sun is always shining. It's never rising or setting. It's never, a little, it just never fades into darkness. It never gets less strong. It's always a shining full strength, brand new every moment. And this is true with God. And it's true with prayer. Prayer, we want to get that point of view that just like that, those rays of light that come out from the sun that seem to come into our experience and then come out of our experience, that's an illusion. The same thing as an illusion about each one of us being born and rising to full maturity and then decaying later in life and passing on. We're always just shining. We're always just God's expression. And what appears to be birth and death, those are things that we witness, but it's not something that we actually experience. In that, if you talk to somebody who's had a near-death experience or something like that, they'll talk about things like, I've interviewed a lot of people who've had these kinds of experiences. They'll say, I looked back at my body and I started to walk towards a light, for example, and they'll describe something, and you realize that their concept of body is within mind. It comes with them. It's just like when you dream at night. You have a concept of body in that dream. You wake up from the dream, what you thought was physical or material was wholly mental, right? The dream was 100% mental. And same thing you see with people who have had near-death experiences. They'll talk about walking and seeing things, and you're saying, well, what legs are you walking with? What eyes are you seeing your old body with? Body is within mind. It's a mental construct of identity. And so in Christian Science, when we pray and get a better mental concept of our identity as God's expression, we can experience a more tangible, active, lovely, well-functioning, good embodiment of God right here and now, in the only moment that God ever makes. Well, as I was continuing to pray about that altitude problem, I went to take I was training for a month-long mountaineering course to end my journey. And I was feeling really ready. I was so in shape. I really had trained for this. And I just knew I could do it. And when I got to that course, everything about it just felt so right. But before entering it, they said, oh, by the way, you have to just check with this doctor. Everybody's got to do a quick exam with the doctor before we begin our hike. And I went to this doctor, and he examined me, and and everybody in that class. And he said, unfortunately, I didn't pass the exam because he did some blood tests, and the blood tests came back, and he said there wasn't enough hemoglobin in my blood, and he gave some diagnosis to this and put some words to it, and he said essentially I had a hemoglobin deficiency, and I wouldn't be healthy at those high altitudes. I would definitely get ill. Now, he was just giving a name and a description to things I had already experienced. And it was certainly valid to my past experience. And you could sometimes think, well, if this has happened in the past, it's probably going to happen in the future. And science is about, predicting with statistical evidence to see how probable that is and so forth. But I really felt in that moment that I could finally just deal with this in prayer. I just knew that I'd been kind of working up to this, and I knew that this course was a right idea for me to do. And I asked the doctor if I could take a walk. Now the thing is this doctor, he really liked me, and he said, well, what if I just lie for you? You've come so far. I can just kind of fudge the results. And I was quite shocked with that. And I know somebody in this sponsoring church was talking about dealing with dishonesty in their community. And something that this book says, Science and Health, that honesty is spiritual power. And I thought to myself, well, Jesus didn't say you would know the lie and the lie would somehow get you out of this one. He said, you will know the truth. You shall know the truth. The truth shall set you free. And so often in life, Jesus seemed to be between a rock and a hard place. Like one time, the Jews didn't like his radical love, and they were trying to catch him in some kind of situation that would get him in trouble. And so they saw a prostitute who was caught in the act of adultery. And the Jewish law said, well, if you're caught in the act of adultery, you should be stoned. Now, in Roman law, it was illegal to stone someone. And so the Jews brought up Jesus, and brought him to this scene, and said, okay, what are you going to do? Because Jesus, if he said, okay, she should be stoned, well, he would get in trouble by the Romans. And if he didn't stone her, he would get in trouble by the Jews. So what did Jesus do? He prayed. You shall know the truth shall set you free. He prayed. And that prayer, it brought a universal solution of good. And what did Jesus do? What did he feel compelled, animated by this Christ understanding to say? He said, if you're without sin, cast the first stone. And the people started to look within them. That's where the kingdom of heaven is. And they started to realize, oh, she's no different than me. I too have gone astray sometimes in my own thought. And the oldest, the wisest people left first, right? And then Jesus spoke to this woman and said, sin no more, and really revived her spiritual sense of life, I believe. And so when I was between that rock and a hard place, I could have said, well, yes, I've got this deficiency. I shouldn't take the class, and then just not take the class. That was a bad option. Or to say, to lie and get in. That's a bad option too. And so I just knew the truth would deliver me. So I took a walk, and I started to pray about what is the truth. Jesus, he said he was the light of the world, but he also said to his followers that they were the light of the world. I don't think Jesus really saw individuals as different from himself. I think he saw himself as the Son of God, but he saw others as the sons and daughters of God. I think he saw himself as an expression of God. I think he saw others as an expression of God. Perfect, unique, eternal, needed, loved. Now, that analogy with light, I've been talking a little bit about the sun today. Well, if you look at the sun, I remember walking that day actually when I was praying, and I saw the sun shining through some trees. And imagine if you saw some light beams shining through some trees, and you said to those beams of light, hey man, you're no good, you got bad blood, you're I didn't see you shining yesterday. If you started to manipulate that light, put some drugs into that light? Would it change that light beam at all? No. What if you put that light beam into a box, brought it into another room, opened up that box, would it be in there? No. Now, why am I using that analogy? Because if you actually think, if you're honest with yourself, how do you identify yourself? How do you identify others? You often talk about what they said in their life, what other people have said about them. You talk about what has happened physically to them in the past. You talk about how they're boxed in by cultural belief. This age, this race, this height, this color hair from this part of town, this vocational history. All that stuff, right? All these limited descriptions. Now, what actually defines that light beam? Why is it that you can't trap it and put it into a box? You open up the box, it's not there. Why? It's because it's made out of its one source, brand new every moment. It doesn't have two sources, just one source, the sun. And the sun needs every ray of light. The sun, you could say, is the cause of all the light beams, but each light beam is an expression of the source. You can't have a light beam without the sun. You can't have the sun without a light beam. They're at one. Now, I'm just going to pause here just for a moment, and I want to talk about the symbol for prayer that we have. If you ask just about anyone all around the world, what does prayer look like? What is the symbol for prayer? They'll think about someone down on their knees, their eyes are closed, their hands are folded, and this is such a ubiquitous image for prayer. Now again, we can pray without ceasing. We don't have to be in that physical position because prayer is a holy mental activity. I think life is a holy mental activity. But that symbol does connote, does symbolize the truth, just like certain words are symbols of truth. Now, what does it symbolize to be down on your knees? That's about humility. In the old days, if you went before a king, you would often genuflect, get down on one knee to show reverence, show deference to the king, that this king has power over you. Well, when we put both of our knees down in prayer, I think that's symbolizing real humility, recognizing that there is one thing bigger and beyond us, life itself, love itself. It's really creating and sustaining this moment. It's creating everything right and real, and we express it, but we're not the creator. Well, Jesus said, I can of my own self do nothing. I think he understood this point better than anyone. What does it represent to close our eyes? Jesus was a man of the wilderness, but he said that we need to go into a closet to pray. There weren't a lot of closets around when he was hiking out in the desert. He was clearly talking about going somewhere where we block out our physical perception of life because it often lies to us. And our physical senses can never fully reveal to us what's true. Just like when we see a flat earth or a sun rising and later setting, those are earthly, incomplete visions of things. We need to get a higher, more heavenly view. And how did Jesus do that? Well, it was about his oneness with God. That was core to understanding this higher, heavenly view that reveals reality. And what about hands coming together? I think this is about oneness. So often in life, we seem to have two hands, two arms all day long, as opposite as can be. But in prayer, there's a dissolution of division, of divisiveness, of two-ness. And there's this often pleading for oneness in our understanding of it. What did Jesus say? I and my Father are two, but when I pray, we're relatively close? No. He said, I and my Father are one, just one thing. Well, when I was on that walk, I started to think about myself as the light of the world. And I started to think about myself as the light coming from God, right? From the sun, so to speak, that sun being a metaphor for God. And if you put your hand up to a light beam for as long as you want and you take it down all of a sudden, it's still shining because it's brand new right out from the sun every moment. One of my very favorite parts of the Bible is the very end of it, in Revelation. The very end of the Bible, it talks about all of our visions of sickness and sin disappearing. And then it says, behold, I, God, make all things new. All things new. And when I was on that hike, or that little walk, I should say, praying about the situation, I just started to feel that my life was brand new from God every moment. It wasn't based upon the patterns of material experience in the past. It wasn't based upon any identity, material identity. It wasn't based upon what some doctor said or physical experiences of the past, or how the world had tried to box me in, or perhaps that medical field tried to box me in with this limiting label. That wasn't my identity. My identity came right from God. And it's wonderful to work with those different synonyms. If we're the expression of mind, we're forever thoughtful, we're intelligent, we're full of good, intelligent, eternal ideas. If we're the expression of love, we're always full of love and never full of fear or hate. And we're soulful, we can always feel that sense of bountiful creativity and creative solutions coming to the surface. And if God is principle, then there must be a right ethical solution that allows us to go forward with love and truth and so forth. And as I was praying, I just felt this truth about my spiritual identity, that it was the source of freedom, the source of health. And I just knew things were going to work out. I just knew it. I knew that I knew that I knew. And when I went back to the doctor, I just had this wonderful sense of authority and confidence. And I just said, I know I can do this hike. And he said, well, I'll just write you a recommendation. And I said, great. And I handed it in, and they let me in the class, no questions asked. And when I got up to the high altitudes for the very first time, not only did I not feel sick at all, I felt real health, real health. Mary Baker Eddy, in one of her writings, defines health as the consciousness of the unreality of pain and disease, or rather the absolute consciousness of harmony and of nothing else. I just love that. And that's what I felt up there. And in fact, a friend of mine, he was quite ill, the only other person from the United States taking that class, and we became real quick friends, and it was awesome to have him up there. And he got super ill, and even though he had no problems with his blood test or anything, he was so sick that he was going to have to hike back down the next day and not take the course. And we opened up to a chapter in this book called The Apocalypse. There's a lot of terrible movies these days about the apocalypse, but apocalypse really means a coming to end of anything ungodlike, and just the renewal that comes from God. And at the very end of this book called The Apocalypse, Mary Baker Eddy takes the 23rd Psalm and brings out the spiritual sense of it by replacing some words. And I'll just read to you just a tiny bit of it. I read this to him that night. Divine love is my shepherd, I shall not want. Love maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Love leadeth me beside the still waters. Love restoreth my soul, spiritual sense. And my friend's sense of life seemed to be very material, very fearful, very limited. And as we prayed together, that started to go away. There's a vision of maybe some warped glass in front of his eyes, and he started to see life that was really warped, and it was like taking that away. We started to feel and experience that perfection that underlies reality, that perfect love that everything is really made of. And he went to sleep peacefully that night. Next morning he woke up, he was feeling great, and everyone said, what kind of magic pill did you take? And it was a wonderful chance to share about the efficacy of Christian Science healing. Well, I know this lecture probably has stirred up a lot of questions for you. If you want to ask a question, you can write in right now to lectureqa@gmail.com, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave a comment there in the chat. I'm just going to share with you one little last thing about the discoverer and founder of Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, and then we'll open it up for a few questions. Mary Baker Eddy was a remarkable woman. There's a lot of great biographies about her. This one, called Christian Healer, is a really amazing one. If you open up the back of it, there's a little index, and under healings, you can just pick any letter, like pick C, for example, and it'll show you all these different things that she healed. She healed cancer of the chest, cancer of the face, cancer of the neck, spider cancer, stomach cancer, throat cancer, cancer while someone was preaching, cataract, chronic disease, chronic trouble, colds, consumption, convulsions, coughing, crippled boy, crippled man, somebody who was crippled by or crushed by a wagon, somebody was different people wearing crutches, crying infant, cyclone. And those are just some of the C's. And this book actually is, it's online now at jsh.christianscience.com, online for you to search and read and so forth. And this is really a wonderful book about Mary Baker Eddy's life. There's a lot of great biographies. In this book, there's a story about a woman who met her. And before I tell you this story, I just want to give you a little thought experiment here. Just offer a thought experiment, because Mary Baker Eddy, even though she was such a successful healer, in this book, Science and Health, she refers to herself as the discoverer of Christian Science a lot, but she doesn't refer to herself as Christian healer Mary Baker Eddy. Why is that so, even though she was such a successful healer? She saw that her discovery of Christian Science was something so much more profound than her own individual healing work. And to illustrate this, imagine if there was a musician, and this musician was playing the most beautiful music. Now, this music was really helpful to hear, because it's helpful to hear what good music sounds like. And maybe if you just saw what they were doing with their fingers, you could learn from them. Maybe if you just heard them talk about music, you could garner little insights. And maybe you would still walk away feeling like, well, she's gifted. And I don't have the gift of music, so I can't really do it. And you'd kind of try little things, and it wouldn't sound very good. Now, imagine if somebody walked up on stage one day and said, well, I've discovered the science of music. There are eternal relationships between the notes. Anyone can understand those relationships. Once you understand them and understand how to read music, understand the letter of music, you can literally take sheet music and play any song in the world. And you can actually study this and get better at it and better at it. Anyone can do it. Well, that would be an amazing discovery, the science of music. Well, Mary Baker Eddy, she saw in the life of Jesus a life that could not be replicated, a perfect life of God, that Jesus fully overcame all the limitations in our human experience, sin, disease, and even death. But the full unpacking, understanding of how to do that through prayer was uncovered in her life through this book, Science and Health. She really felt this came from inspiration from God, but it wasn't something like just one revelation on the mountain and then here it is. She kept practicing and reaching out to God and learning more and revising this book and doing that again and again and again. She revised this book over a 35-year period, revised it over 400 times, really wanted to get it right. So people, when they read it, they could experience healing for themselves and others. And last 100 pages are all wonderful accounts of people being healed through reading this book. Now, back to the story here. This woman who met Mary Baker Eddy that's cataloged in this book, this woman is named Harriet O'Brien. She was alive during Mary Baker Eddy's age. Mary Baker Eddy was a New Englander for most of her life. She was born in 1821, lived until 1910. And Harriet O'Brien, she was someone who had such problems with health in her life. Chronic back issues, chronic heart issues, picked up an iatrogenic ailment, something caused by medical intervention that went wrong, and one of her ligaments was severed in one of her limbs, and she couldn't walk. She was relegated to a wheelchair. She got so sick she couldn't speak, write. Her motor movements shut down. She felt like she was on death's door when she was introduced to Christian Science. But very quickly, through Christian Science prayer, she was revived to a life of health. And she was still in her wheelchair, however, and so she kept praying week after week, month after month. She finally overcame that as well. And when she got better, she really wanted to meet Mary Baker Eddy, as you could imagine. She wanted to get to the source of where all these healing truths came from. And so often it's been a problem in the history of spirituality, of people getting obsessed with a particular spiritual leader, something like that, creating unhealthy dependencies or relationships. And Mary Baker Eddy, everything about her teachings is really about our direct relationship to God without any intermediary, any person. And so Mary Baker Eddy, she really pushed people to understand their direct relationship to God and not come through a personality as the source of truth. And Harriet O'Brien, when she went to meet Mary Baker Eddy, I often just paraphrase this part, but I was reading this morning. This is page 484 in this book. She writes, transparency is the word that best expresses my impression of Mrs. Eddy. Instinctively, I felt her great love, and I was conscious that no one I'd ever seen loved me as much as she did. My entire thought was filled with a spiritual illumination, and there was a glory in the sunshine and landscape as though a breath of heaven had swept earth and enveloped me, while tears of gratitude rained down my cheeks unheeded. I'd caught a glimpse of the great difference between a mortal and spiritual man in God's image and likeness. And she said, my trip to Boston was for the purpose of determining whether the time had come for me to open a practitioner's office. After seeing Mrs. Eddy, all my questions were fully answered, and she returned home and opened an office at once. And she later wrote that this experience helped me see how inseparable and how much alike Mrs. Eddy and her writings are. Well, I love that story, and Harriet O'Brien advertised in the Christian Science Journal for over 50 years, became quite a successful healer. And in fact, she says right in here that after she opened her office, she healed desperate illnesses and sometimes raised the dying in 1 or 2 visits. So she too was able to heal people. And I think so many people who are listening to this lecture, they might think, well, this isn't for me. But just like learning music, anyone can do it. I once took a class of Ebwe music. It's this very, very, sometimes people consider it the most difficult rhythmic music in the world, from Ghana, Togo, Benin, West Africa. And I had a teacher and who just taught music like a language. And I just looked around the class before the first class started, and I just thought, these people are not going to be able to play this music because they didn't seem to be musically talented or have a background in music. And she just taught it like a language, like you can teach anyone to do it. And then people started to respond to that, and they started to do it. And healing is very natural. It's not really creating anything or changing anything about reality. It's just uncovering the perfection, the love, the truth, the soul that's underneath everything. It's about discovering what's really here and getting rid of any discordant thought that might be blocking or manipulating or distorting our sense of reality. Okay, so at this point I'm going to open it up for a few questions, and then we'll wrap it up. So again, if you'd like to ask a question, you can write me at lectureqa@gmail.com or leave a question in the chat. We do have a question that came in from someone who is asking about religion surviving and Christian Science surviving in this technological age. They're basically saying that religion seems to be dying out, seems to be on the decline, and more people are trusting material science. That's the essence of this question. And do I think Christian Science is going to survive in the future? Truth is always true. You don't create truth, you can discover it. And even in the history of science, you see sometimes some truths being discovered and not believed for a certain period, and maybe there's a declining number of people who believe in something until it's really proved and proved and proved again. And in the early days of Christianity, a lot of people were healing through prayer, and it was growing very fast. But then that healing element seemed to die down, and Christianity continued to grow in some ways, but more as a creed or doctrine. But that original healing element, that really living the truths which Jesus lived for, died out. And I think in our technological age, people are so impressed by technology that they get swept into it, but then they eventually start to realize it doesn't really meet their needs fully. Like I know a lot of people who get so wrapped up in social media, and then they start to feel, well, actually, this is not really helpful for my mental life. It's not helping me with my purpose. It's not helping me feel love. It's not helping me find real truth. And they eventually start to cut back. And technology can be wonderful, can help our lives, it can be an expression of the intelligence of God, but we can't rely on as the source of intelligence or love and truth. And I think more than ever, I think people are interested in meditation and even prayer, and interested in seeing life as an expression of consciousness. People are thinking about consciousness because it can't be explained materially. And there's the hard problem of consciousness in philosophy that's never been answered, and a lot of people around the world are thinking about this. And so I think actually Christian Science, even though if it seems to be on the down culturally at the moment, it is the truth. It does explain the truth. And so the truth withstands cultural beliefs. Jesus said, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away." He really knew what he was teaching was eternal. And Christian Science just fully helps bring out that true spiritual meaning of what Jesus taught. And it will stand the test of time because it's truth. Okay, let's see. Any other questions that came in? I don't see any at the moment, although I know someone was asking me recently just about what is the Christian Science stance on vaccination. Someone asked me that yesterday, essentially. And one of the things I love about the Christian Science Church is it doesn't tell members that you must do this or you must do that. This is what our church does, kind of thing. I grew up in going to some different Christian churches that were a little bit like that took a strong political opinion on certain issues. Christian Science really tries to remove itself from cultural movements at one time period or another. It really focuses on spiritual truth, and then it allows and inspires the individual to make the best choice for themselves, not a kind of groupthink thing, like, okay, well, this is what someone else says, so I must do it. No, it empowers us to think critically, to think intelligently, to trust God, to actually pray and not just choose a material option. You know how we talked about when there's two bad options, you can pray and something will come out to bless everybody? That's what Christian Science allows us to do. And so I think there's real wisdom in the Christian Science approach of not making religion about choosing a particular material solution at one time or another. And so when it comes to vaccination, for example, Christian scientists have different opinions about this. Everything about Christian Science is about showing how real health comes from spirit, God, and not matter. But that said, I mean, we're all eating food, and when I ride around, I often wear a helmet when I'm using my bicycle and so forth, and we take precautions. We wear seat belts. Some people think a vaccination is not much different than wearing a seat belt or a helmet. So just a precautionary kind of thing, and they do it to help assuage the fear of people in their community. But other people felt, well, I've used God as my first aid my whole life, and it's been very effective for me, and I like to really focus in on that and not muddy up my thinking with any material remedies. And I know some Christian Scientists who have very, have just isolated themselves to assuage the fears of their community members and have chose not to get vaccinated. But for the most part, I shouldn't say for the most part, for the whole of Christian Science, it's about really being a great citizen, really being a great expression of love, where you are a healthy expression of love, bringing out the highest form of health. And that includes being very compassionate and tender with your community and your loved ones and so forth like that. And so Christian Scientists are listening and making individual choices that really benefit their family members and their communities in practical and ways that are always supportive of the laws of the land. Okay, so anything else here? Well, I'm just so grateful for everyone who joined this lecture today. I just know that these ideas can really bless us as we continue to internalize them, to really nurture our spiritual growth as we read these two books. The Bible really is a treasure trove of wisdom and insight, and the experiences that, especially of Jesus in this, are just so helpful to go back to again and again. And this book, Science and Health, it really is a key that unlocks that spiritual meaning of the Bible. It says in the Bible that we can have the same mind that was also in Christ Jesus in the book of Philippians. And so that's what Science and Health teaches, how to get that mentality of Jesus, that heavenly view that really shows things correctly. So often in life we think that everything revolves around us, just like that earth-centric view. It seems like we're stationary, the earth is stationary and the sun is revolving around us. But actually, if we were able to stand on the sun, we would get the correct view that the earth revolves around the sun and everything revolves around the sun in our solar system. Well, this book, Science and Health, it reorients our thought to not live a self-centered life, but a God-centered life. And it's correct in that, just like if you're on the sun and you're seeing things move around the sun, that's the correct viewpoint. Not everything moves around the earth. And a self-centered viewpoint is incorrect. And so that view that we're looking at today, that prayer that reforms the sinner and heals the sick, absolute faith that all things are possible to God, a spiritual understanding of Him, and unselfed love. That unselfed love, we can just kick self right out of here, because we're looking out from God, from universal love that knows no limitations, that touches and blesses all. And I often think about words in relationship to prayer. Like, sometimes people at the very end of a talk like this, they'll come up to me and they'll say, "Well, Nate, this is all good. I'm thinking about faith and understanding love and all that, but what words do you actually say when you pray?" And there are some great examples in the Bible. And in fact, Jesus gives literally an example prayer in Matthew 6, the Lord's Prayer. Psalm 23, Psalm 91 are wonderful prayers that you can memorize, you can go to for comfort. But prayer is more than words. Prayer is really about our oneness with God. It's about our relationship with God. And if you think about any relationship in your life, what makes a good relationship? What words do you say to make a perfect relationship? It's kind of a funny question, because it's not just words. Like, I love you is good, but if I say I love you, that's not going to make a great relationship, just repeating that over and over again. Repeating some script that somebody gave you to say to somebody, that's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be real. It's not going to produce a great relationship just memorizing what other people told you or some holy book that you read. That's not going to be right, because it has to be authentic. It has to be truthful, right? What you share with someone. What makes a great relationship? One way to look at it is faith, understanding, and love. If you have an absolute faith in someone, that's going to make for a great relationship. To really believe in them when others don't believe in them, that's going to be a great foundation for a relationship. But you can't just have faith and not understand them. You have to really understand them. What does understanding take? It takes quality time, it takes non-judgmental listening. And it's good to have faith, it's good to have understanding in someone, but you need love. And not a selfish love, not a quid pro quo love. Oh, I'm going to love you and really make you feel like you belong and everything, but just when it suits me, and as long as I'm getting something good in return. No. Unconditional, unselfed love. If you really love someone, no matter what, you have absolute faith in them, you understand them spiritually, right? And you love them without self, that's going to make for an amazing relationship. And the same is true with the most important relationship of all, a relationship with God. Right? In a world that doesn't believe in God and is shouting materialistic things all day long, we can have an absolute faith in God. We can take quality time to really understand God spiritually in an unconfined, infinite way. And we can love God Um, and this is it. It really works. As we learn to have an absolute faith that includes understanding love, we find good relationships with others and with God. I often like to think about who is Jesus resurrecting to? Because Jesus, when he resurrected, it was to a bunch of his disciples who had all given up on him in his darkest moments, who all said, I don't even know this guy, right? When times got tough. And Jesus was coming back to them. Why did he do that? Because I think he had an absolute faith in them. Why did he have faith? Because he really understood who they were as expressions of God. And he loved them. He really loved them. Not because of what they did in the past, not because of how they acted, because he understood who they were as expressions of divine love. So I hope you got some inspiration from this lecture. If you want to jump online, there's some websites to learn more. ChristianScience.com. You can find more lectures like this, more churches in your area, or if you want to go to a Wednesday night testimony meeting, hear people testify to experiences in their own life that are based upon their study of Christian Science. You can find that at ChristianScience.com, jsh.ChristianScience.com. You could find biographies of Mary Baker Eddy and articles written from people all around the world about how they're practicing Christian Science effectively today. And just a big thank you to the sponsors of this event, First Church of Christ Scientists in Rochester. They're located at 701 Mount Hope Avenue. They've got Sunday services, 10:30, Wednesday testimony meetings at 7:30 p.m., both in-person and remote access. You can check them out at christiansciencerochester.org. And, of course, they have Sunday school in person if you want to bring a little one. And they have a reading room at 179 Monroe Avenue near downtown. And that's open on Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. So, again, just a big thank you to the First Church of Christ Scientists, Rochester, all the wonderful members there. To close, I just want to say that each and every one of you are so wonderful. I believe that you're all an expression of God analogous to like a number in a number system. And without you, life would not be complete. You are needed. You are loved. And I hope you felt that today, and I hope you feel that always. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you so very much.